why winter heat waves are bad. Winter heat waves are bad. Even though they feel like nice days in the winter, you really shouldn't be having seemingly hot winter days. Here's why it's bad for the environment. And also, if it's natural, it's going to lead to severe storms, but still. February 2018 in the eastern United States had remarkable warmth. Several states set all-time February record highs. New York, for example, got up to 79 degrees. The upper New England states got to 77. Massachusetts got to 80. New Jersey, that got to 83. Several cities also saw all-time February record highs, and several record high lows were set, including as high as a 66-degree low in Louisville. That was for a 24-hour period. Lows in the 60s in the winter? That's remarkable. Obviously, a cold front would bring things back down to seasonable averages, but the persistent warmth led to 8 states, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, into having their warmest February on record, and many of the states were close. It was hot out that February, so hot that for the second year in a row, that March would wind up being cooler than the previous February. That March was characterized by chronic cold, and for much of the month, temperatures failed to get above 50 degrees across Long Island. But obviously, February was a very different story. Also, the high temperature was warmer in February than it was in March. Now, wind off the water did make it harder to establish this warmth away from the city center. Thankfully, I was in the city that day away from the suburbs, which was very nice. Because I heard that by the time we got to the National-Suffolk border, it only got up to 66 degrees. We've had a lot warmer days than that in the winter before, and we would even last winter when it got to 69, beating the city's high of 68. Bangor in that winter heat wave also had an all-time high of 65, but as this has cooled down immediately, it wasn't really the same. And I want to tell you why this was bad. Because it's starting to sound like summer and winter, which isn't exactly the worst thing in the world, and would actually be appreciated by a lot of people, but it was bad. And I'll tell you why. Several places on eastern Long Island had their highs constrained to the 50s, It ranged from being June-ish weather to being April-ish weather, depending on where on the island you were, and due to the wind off the water, which sometimes isn't persistent, sometimes it is. What I mean by this is that in some cases, wind off the water will barely work to constrain your high temperature. In other times, it'll work greatly to constrain your high temperature. It's really variable. Now, anyway, moving along from that, here's why it was bad. Because this is starting to sound like a beautiful February day, what happened on February 20th to 21st, 2018. In one of the northernmost stations in the world, where the sun would not rise until March and after setting in October, they managed to somehow be, I don't know what the best way to put it is, a day above freezing. That is not normal. 43 degrees sounds cold. In the Arctic in winter, that should not be happening. It should not be getting that warm. That's way too warm. And having a day over freezing? Like, what the hell is going on? That should not be happening. That should not be happening. But it did. Several cities on the East Coast recorded record high 500 millibar heights. And that makes sense because this was some of the most unseasonable ever. I mean, if New York City is having a low in the mid-50s in February, something that should not be happening until mid-May in the area, something's up. And if the temperature diurnal variation is wide, that's even more alarming. And this wasn't even like December 2015, which was characterized by its chronic, persistent warmth. I mean, 72 degrees on Christmas Eve is crazy. And even when you got to the National-Suffolk border, where the wind off the water worked to constrain it, it was still in the mid-60s as a high, with lows in the mid-50s that were 63 in the city. And it wasn't even like the one before where it was just an extreme warm-up following an even more extreme cold front. Because those things naturally happen. But when it's like this, it shouldn't be happening. And in the Arctic, temperatures should be more stable. Because global warming is affecting the Arctic more than anywhere else. And this is starting to cause sea ice meltage. I mean, how the hell did 1/3 of the ice in Alaska manage to melt in February? That is crazy. And if the Arctic sea ice melting is bad enough in the winter, just imagine what it would be like if it starts to melt in February. But that's what started to happen. Again, that far north, I think it was in the 80s north, should not be getting to the 40s anytime even near February. To put into perspective how crazy above average it was, basically, we know New York City was very hot on February 21st. We know it was. That being said, the average high for that time of year is in the low 40s. So imagine if you had a 96 degree day in February in New York City. Now, 96 degrees is warm at any time of the year. But if that would happen in February, it would be making global headlines. It would be one of the craziest things ever. And disturbingly, that's what happened in the Arctic, or an equivalent of that. And imagine if something like that happened during the summer. I know it didn't, but imagine if it did. Take an already 85 degree day in New York City and add 45 degrees to it, and you're at Death Valley levels of heat. You're at heat that hasn't been equaled by over 20 degrees. It's kind of disturbing. But again, warm days in the winter, not very good unless it's immediately followed by a strong cold front, which do bring violent storms, but hey, it's better than climate change.